ho, ho! Or does nobody actually say that?
The Sea Beast is the kind of concoction which you would get if you blended up How to Train Your Dragon, Pirates of the Caribbean, and a little bit of The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, before watering it all down and thus leaving something which has a little bit the same spark as those other things, but is overall kinda bland. Okay, that was a terrible metaphor and honestly sounded kinda harsh in hindsight, because I do think that The Sea Beast is a decent little movie, and I know that there are many people who really got on well with it, and I can genuinely see why. It's got a lot of great things, and whilst I may take issue with some parts of it, none of its problems ruin the film by any means. Hell, I'd even argue that some of my own criticisms are kinda stupid when I say them out loud. Although I do still have some legitimate flaws here, don't get me wrong. First of all, this movie's nearly 2 hours long and it really didn't need to be that. This could have easily been wrapped up in a clean hour and a half because the story isn't exactly rich or meaty enough to warrant this length. Speaking of the story, jeez, this was such a predictable film. I implied at the start of this segment that this film was a lot like How to Train Your Dragon. And whilst I wouldn't call it a rip-off in any way, it does stick way too close to that film's formula for my liking without doing much of its own thing, which thus meant that I struggled to engage myself with the film as I could easily guess where the plot was heading. Humans are fighting this creature they don't fully understand, but then some preteen shows them that they're not actually that bad, which, after an initial conflict, turns everyone's opinions around on them, including the father figure of the main character who acted somewhat antagonistic for a time. Like, yeah, the plotlines are way too similar when I describe them like that. Now, normally this wouldn't matter too much, but the Sea Beast still became weaker in my mind because it really lacked much of its own identity, outside of some of its interesting themes which I'll get to later. And it definitely can't stand toe-to-toe with How to Train Your Dragon because it's nowhere near as dramatic and the characters aren't as compelling. Speaking of which, let's talk about the characters. Now, the cast here are actually pretty good on the whole, even if they're not stellar or anything. I like Jacob as the action hero protagonist who has to come to terms with what he learns over the course of the film, and the captain was a really fascinating semi-antagonist who, as I said before, goes through an arc where he learns the truth of the Sea Beast, and actually stops acting like the antagonist at the very end. That was a solid little arc, and I do love the father-son-like bond that he has with Jacob at the start. I just wish that they spent more time together because it doesn't take long for them to get separated, and now Jacob is stuck with annoying kid number 27. Yeah, still like I'm keeping up the theme of hating on children. Just like the first mate for real.
Ugh, horrible things, children.
But yeah, I really wasn't a big fan of Maisie. I felt like she was quite a pandering character who just spent the whole movie barking the messages of the film at the audience, which kinda just made her feel naggy and annoying. Like, this is meant to be a fun little movie, but she's not a fun character to hang out with. But the big kicker for her is, God, I can't believe I'm about to say this, her accent makes her really annoying. You see, she has a British accent, and yes, I am the one criticising it despite being a Brit myself. But please, let me explain myself. In the UK, we have more accents than names for bread rolls, and I am a big defender for most of them. There's so many which I'd much rather listen to than generic American accents. Sorry, not sorry. The Welsh, the Scottish, the Scousers, the Geordies, in fact most northern accents, and the Brummies. I love them all no matter what other people say. But, in spite of that fact about myself, I'm honestly not a big fan of accents from the southeast. I just find them kind of annoying, particularly the female accents. And, I'll be honest, the sole reason as to why is because of Peppa Pig PTSD. That little slab of ham drives me up the wall, and anything which reminds me of her, like Maisie's voice, also annoys me. Hey now, I did say earlier that even I consider some of my own criticisms to be dumb, and this is a prime example of that. I mean, I do still stand by the fact that I don't think Maisie's a very well written character, but she's definitely worse in my mind because of my biases against children in the southeast. To be honest, after a while I started to imagine Maisie with a Brummie accent, and she became a lot more entertaining for me afterwards. Right, listen up everyone. Starting tomorrow, these sea beasts are under the protection of the Peaky fucking Blinders. Okay, that was a terrible Brummie accent, but I still take that over what we got. However, in spite of my stupid points of irritation with this movie, I did still like the overall package well enough. In fact, I especially loved the themes present. Whilst I still think that Maisie was quite naggy, I did like a speech at the very end which exemplified what this film is all about. Basically, this film decided to tackle the idea of historical revisionism and how people will manipulate history in order to brainwash future generations into siding with them and their actions. That's a really intriguing message, and is very important to be aware of nowadays. And now I understand why characters like Maisie are British, because this is a bit of an issue for us, as I'm sure you all know. So yeah, this was definitely an interesting film which likely sparked a lot of great discussions. But as for the content of the film itself, there were many moments which did actually hook me in despite my issues with the pacing. I especially think that the naval battles were absolutely awesome. They were exciting, stressful, and the animation went hard in those scenes. This is why I mentioned Pirates of the Caribbean earlier, because these battles are honestly on a similar league to that, even in animation. And on the topic of the animation, I will say that I'm not mad on the designs of the titular sea beasts. They're a bit too kiddie and plasticky for my liking. However, that doesn't change the fact that the animation is still great on the whole. I mean, that is some nice looking water. However, despite how awesome the action scenes are, my favourite part of the movie was actually the middle where Jacob and Maisie just kind of vibed with Red for a bit. I like this part because Maisie was less annoying, the film ironically didn't feel as boring here as it did in the final act where more stuff happened, and it was quite fun on the whole and developed Jacob as a character in a meaningful way. Oh, and it's got Blue, who's adorable. So yeah, there were segments of this movie that I really liked. But the bloated runtime, slightly annoying Maisie, and lack of clear identity for most of the film all play a part in me not really loving the Sea Beast. But it's still got some good characters as well as some nice animation with some really fantastic shots, a few funny jokes sprinkled throughout, as well as some great ideas and messages. It's a decent enough time. The Bad Guys is way better though, and I would have much rather rewatched that for this marathon, even if I didn't mind the Sea Beast in the end.
Oh, bloody hell. Oh, what's in the box?
The Box Trolls is a decent little watch, but that's kind of all it really is, to be honest. It was definitely enjoyable enough at points, and it has got some really good elements to it, but on the whole, I found the film pretty mediocre and forgettable. It's got a really simple story which doesn't really pick up until the final third, the characters are all kind of bland and unmemorable, including our protagonists, Eggs and Winnie, who I just didn't connect with very much at all, and the pacing really wasn't great. Not only did it feel very stop-starty throughout, but certain moments felt like they went on forever, especially the final battle. On the whole, there's just not much for me to really grapple onto, outside of a few thematic points in relation to class division and propaganda, which were executed decently, I guess. I did think that it was humorous to see the rich portrayed as these cheese-obsessed imbeciles, and it was interesting to see the ways in which the harmless box trolls were seen as monsters by the town as a result of Snatcher's lies and propaganda, spread after the incident of the Trapshaw baby, aka Eggs. But neither of these themes were really expanded upon that much. The propaganda ideas are kinda lost by the second half, and the satire of the rich doesn't really go that much further than kooky cheese eaters. I don't know, I just would have liked a bit more. It also doesn't really help that I found a good chunk of the movie around the middle kinda fillery. Eggs has to rescue Fish for a bit, and then he goes to this dance, and it's not that interesting, and this is where the pace really stagnates. Speaking of which, all of the stuff in the palace truly felt pointless to me, as it ultimately led to nothing due to the fact that no one actually listened to what Eggs had to say, because rich people are stupid. I guess this punchline is kinda funny, but it equally just means that this scene was a complete waste of my time. At least, that's what it felt like to me. So yeah, I wasn't mad on a lot of this movie. But there are two main things present here, which I thought were both really great, and they helped to elevate this movie for me somewhat. The first thing is the animation. Obviously. Spoilers for later on this list, but I will be consistently praising Laika throughout this entire ranking, because I absolutely love their stop motion. It's always absolutely gorgeous and incredibly timeless. In fact, I won't just be praising Laika in this regard, as I will actually praise every stop motion movie from now on for its visuals, because stop motion animation is my absolute favourite type of animation and I cannot get enough of it. So yeah, my love for how this film looks is a major factor for why I liked it just that little bit more than other films which appear to be of similar quality. But the other big thing which I enjoyed here was the villains. Oh man, the box troll exterminators are so hammy and over the top that they are absolutely amazing. Every scene of the movie which solely focuses on them was the best scene of the movie because they were super entertaining to watch the shenanigans of. Archibald Snatcher especially was a freaking loony that I couldn't help but obsess with in all of his scenes. Also, Ben Kingsley gave it his all with his performance. Seriously, he went to town with the howiness of the character, and just sounded like he was having an absolute blast with this role. Although, I do have to say, I honestly couldn't tell whether it was Kingsley who also did the voice of Snatcher whilst he was in drag. The voices sound so different that it wouldn't surprise me if they got someone else to step in. But, if Kingsley did do the voice here as well, then that's absolutely legendary. Mad respect. And alongside Snatcher, his henchmen are also really funny. The short guy whose name escapes me is another over-the-top loon and I loved him. And, as you can probably guess, I was ecstatic to hear both Nick Frost and Richard Ayoade within this movie, as these two hilarious bumbling idiots who are only working for Snatcher because they think that is the right thing to do. But it was nice to see them go through a little arc where they truly realise which side they should fight on. However, whilst the combination of Frost and Ayoade felt surprisingly natural and was really strong, I'm slightly mad that Laika went to the effort to get both Simon Pegg and Nick Frost in this movie, yet they didn't make them the comedic double act. In fact, the two characters don't even interact with each other. Come on! This just feels so wrong, honestly. We really needed Shaun and Ed as box troll exterminators. That would have been amazing. All in all though, the villains in the stop motion animation really do a lot of the heavy lifting here, as they carry the film during some of the less interesting parts in the middle. Whenever the villains aren't chewing up the scenery, this is a decent enough film which is a bit dull and unmemorable. But, when they are on screen, the film borders on being really good. So I think that these points kind of balance out to make this film decent rather than simply being mediocre. But that still doesn't change the fact that I really don't have much to say here overall, so let's just move on instead. The Lego Movie was fucking robbed of a nomination.
Chris Pratt. He's so cool.
Onward may be one of Pixar's more mediocre films in my opinion, but that doesn't stop it from being a very likable film with many great elements which are absolutely worth praising. On the whole, I consider it to be a bit of a mixed bag akin to a lot of the 2010s Disney movies, which you will see soon enough, but I really wish it was better, as the stuff which lands here lands so well. But, like so many movies at this point of the list, I have my fair share of issues with it, which I may as well go over now. And to be honest, these are kind of the same criticisms that basically everyone else has. First of all, Chris Pratt. Oh, what a fun name to talk about in relation to animation. Yeah, I'm of the opinion that Chris Pratt's performance as Barley within this movie was not very good. Now, I'm not even one of those guys who inherently thinks that Pratt is a bad voice actor, as he's great as Emmett in the Lego Movie, but his voice just doesn't work for what this movie was going for with Barley. It's too snarky rather than goofy, and it just makes Barley way more annoying than he should be. Unlike Sisu, Barley is a character who I can absolutely picture being not annoying, if they had the right actor for him. He's only annoying to me because Chris Pratt is being forced to play a role that's more suited to someone like Jack Black, and that causes problems for the whole movie because Barley is such a major character who we spend virtually every scene with, so me finding him annoying kinda lets down the whole movie. However, he's not an awful character by any means, and writing wise, he's fine enough. He's a decent, goofy Big Brother type who leads in well to the main themes which I'll discuss later. However, there's also another problem with Onward that I have, which is arguably even worse than Barley, and that's the fantasy world. First of all, I don't get everything related to the fantasy elements present here. I like the idea of magic being forgotten about in favour of technology, but I don't really get how the magic just so happens to come back for certain characters without any clear reason as to why. It's kinda weird to be honest, but the biggest issue with this fantasy world is the fact that it's just so bland. There's not that much creativity with how it presents its creatures living in our modern world, and the visuals are horrendously dull. Like, I get why the city is drab and without much colour, as, you know, it's a city. However, there's absolutely no excuse for why these natural areas should also look so lifeless. Like, this is a fantasy world we're talking about. Where's the colour? Where's the whimsy? It's just so visually uninteresting, and it does a piss poor job at distinguishing the fantasy from the modern lifestyle, as it all just feels the exact same to me. Just look at how the world is presented in The Last Wish by comparison. Now that's a fantasy world. This, on the other hand, is something that I could see in my own country. It doesn't really spark the imagination now, does it? And all of this just severely impacts the world building of the film, which sucks when the fantastical story is such a big part of this film's identity. To be fair though, the magic stuff isn't all bad. I think some of the spells that Ian had to use were pretty creative, and the dragon at the ending looked really cool. This movie had a lot of promise with its world building, but it kinda missed the mark, and that, plus my issues with Barley, both let down this film for me. Also, I have to ask, what the hell was the mom and the manticore doing for the, 10 hours that Ian and Barley were walking around after they lost the truck? Where did they go? Yeah, some of the timings were a bit strange for me. However, that's enough negativity. I still want to emphasize that this movie has so many great elements to it, and that's particularly shown through its messages all about sibling bonds. Now, I'll admit that I know nothing about this theme because only child, baby! But I can still appreciate the way that it was used here, even if it most definitely wouldn't have the same impact on me. I particularly love the ending resolution where Ian let Barley meet their dad, because Barley knew the dad more. And I also loved Ian's realization over how much of an impact Barley has had on his life. That was a beautiful moment, and I imagine that it probably helped a lot of people who were struggling without a parental figure in their life. Truth is, what you need can be right in front of you. In fact, the start of this movie was also fantastic, as it did a great job at showing Ian's struggle with the loss of his father, who he never knew, and I especially loved the tape recorder scene. That was so wholesome. In general, I did really like Ian as a character. In fact, I honestly found him pretty relatable. I mean, he's a socially awkward introvert who's afraid of driving. That's just like me for real. Also, unlike Chris Pratt, Tom Holland was a very good fit and did a great job. So overall, Onward has some great elements, particularly in regards to its main themes regarding the impact that certain family members can have on a person, even after loss, and there are so many specific scenes which I thought were fantastic, like the aforementioned tape recorder and ending scenes, as well as other scenes I didn't mention like the bridge scene. However, this film is still let down quite a bit for me as a result of Chris Pratt and a general level of blandness when it comes to its fantasy elements, which extend from both its plot to its visuals, and it just leads to this film becoming incredibly unmemorable whenever it's not focused on its core themes. It's not a bad movie at all, and I can see why others really love it, but as it stands, it's not one that I'd rush to rewatch personally.
Just do a dog noise! Do a dog noise! No.
Bolt is a really cute little movie that I actually enjoyed quite a bit. Sadly though, for me anyway, the cuteness can't change the fact that this is equally one of the most nonsensical and ridiculous movies I have ever seen in my life, and I can't really call the film anything more than just decent as a result of this. But before I criticize the movie, please remember that I said that I did still enjoy it on the whole. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I know that there will be a whole army of people who will rush to defend Bolt, and you know what? More power to you. I wish I could love it as much as you do, as I can definitely see the appeal here, and I do love parts of it. As I said, it is really cute and it's also quite fun and charming at many points. I just equally have a lot of problems with it, and I'd say that my biggest one by far is the plot. Now, I would personally like to believe that studying films academically hasn't hindered my enjoyment of films as a whole. I like to think that I'm not a pretentious cinephile, as I can still enjoy more silly movies at the end of the day, and I'm not a snob when it comes to anything which isn't generally considered to be a 10 out of 10 masterpiece. I mean, I'm making a movie about animation, so I'm clearly no film bro, as we all know that they will never watch animated movies. I also like to think that my knowledge on how films are made hasn't hindered my enjoyment of them either, as I usually don't notice the ways in which certain filmmaking techniques are used, unless I'm actively looking for them on subsequent viewings. However, I think that Bolt is the major exception to this rule because, now that I know how films and TV shows are actually made, I can't take this plot seriously at all. Basically, this film's plot is like the Truman Show, but with a dog who thinks he's a superhero, because he's filming a Superdog TV show. This plot is ridiculous enough as is, but then you see how it's actually executed within the film, and that's when you realize that all logic and common sense has just been thrown out of the window here. And that's all because this crew cares way too much about making the production immersive for the dog. Because if the dog believes everything around it, the audience does too. Somehow. And this one plot decision opens a Pandora's box of ridiculousness. And yes, I'm going to go through all of the really bad major plot holes which I thought up whilst watching this film. First of all, what do you mean this crew doesn't do retakes? Are you telling me that no one ever flubs their lines? I mean, I know you could just say that they do vigorous rehearsals to get everything just right in a similar vein to theatre, or how older TV shows used to be done back in the 60s or something because videotape was expensive to record on. However, it's pretty clear here that they don't do that, as they film these episodes back to back every week like a modern TV show. How on earth do they get everything perfect? And it's not just perfect actors who they need every week, as there's also so many practical effects and stunts present within this show. Are you trying to tell me that not a single one has ever gone wrong? Like, there's never been a faulty detonator during a superbark scene. Again, I know you can train stuntmen and test practical effects vigorously, but anyone who works in this field can tell you that things will still go wrong no matter how much you test them, because human or computer errors will always seep through. And speaking of stunts, how the hell was Bolt trained to do all the superhero stuff? They surely couldn't have been able to get the dad actor to train Bolt for the immersion, right? They would have had to have gotten a professional trainer in, and that surely would have broken Bolt's immersion. And speaking of Bolt's immersion, how did the makeup artist ensure that the lightning bolt stayed on Bolt without him noticing? Did they just paint it on him as he slept? Okay, that's one of the more likely scenarios, but still, it's so much extra effort, and I'm surprised that Bolt never woke up while they were doing it. And alongside all of that, are you seriously trying to tell me that this crew was able to successfully hide the camera in every scene while still getting the best shots? Yeah, no, I'm not convinced. I know they explicitly showed off how the crew film your average scene, but I don't buy what I'm being shown for a second, as it contrasts with the opening action scene which had so many shots where the camera looked directly at Bolt with no shrubbery to hide behind. I mean, the film explicitly shows that the airport scene had a boom mic in it, so surely that means that from Bolt's perspective in this moment, he can see the camera and sound guys, right? Oh, and how do they hide the lighting? Trust me, sets like these require bright lights, which are incredibly noticeable for everyone. Surely Bolt would have seen them, right? And above all of these clear plot holes, I just have one question for the studio. Why the hell does a dog need to method act? It's a dog! Why is this movie actually making me sympathise with Mindy from the network? I honestly agree with her that a studio should spend less time worrying about a dog's method acting and more time crafting good stories. Ugh, this movie just doesn't know how TV shows are made, and that annoys me because I'm a nerd. Although, to be fair, I was initially going to criticise the ending fire for being unrealistic, but then I thought about it and realised that a Hollywood set having no built-in safety like sprinklers alongside an incompetent crew who doesn't help Penny first is arguably the most realistic part of this whole movie, sadly. But yeah, this plot is just one of the most ridiculous things from this entire list, and it lets down the whole movie for me.
What do you know? Haven't you heard of suspension of disbelief?
Well yeah, I've definitely heard of it, and I'm fine with suspending my disbelief. Usually. Like, I can look past the talking dog in this movie and everything. However, because this film's plot is revolved around such a ridiculous premise with so many holes in it, I struggle to really get engaged within the rest of the film. But even when putting aside the premise, I still don't think that this film is anything all that special. Once the main TV show stuff is over, we are left with a pretty generic animal adventure movie which doesn't really do that much for me. It can definitely drag on a bit at points, especially around the middle. Plus, I found some of the characters kind of annoying. Rhino got on my nerves pretty quickly, and I would have enjoyed the movie a whole lot more without him. I even found Bolt himself to be a pretty weak protagonist. I mean, there's some decent ideas around him, such as his existential crisis, and I liked his loyalty to Miley Cyrus through to the end, as it really makes him feel like a true dog. However, he really isn't as entertaining as he could have been. I mean, come on! This dog thinks he's a superhero! Have some fun with that idea! Ham him up a little bit and really play into the superhero tendencies. As it is though, he just comes across as a really forgettable Marvel type hero, which therefore doesn't make him memorable at all. Honestly, I think that this lack of hamminess, which was so desperately needed for Bolt's character, came as a result of a poorly chosen voice actor. This guy just played every scene way too straight, which kind of made me think that I was actually meant to take this ridiculous story seriously, which I had already stopped doing after the TV show scenes, so that made it hard for me to be entertained by this film overall. I wonder who Bolt's voice actor actually was though. Wait, what? John Travolta? Like, Danny from Grease, Vince from Pulp Fiction. You thought that guy should play the funny superdog? Really? He would have honestly been much more suited to play that twatty agent within the film, not the silly doggo. Yeah, I really think that this film desperately needed a superhero actor to play Bolt, as they would know how to ham up the character enough to make him fun. I know Adam West is a common suggestion, and that would have been amazing. However, one of my friends suggested Tobey Maguire, and I honestly couldn't agree more. That would have been awesome and hilarious. So yeah, I can pick out flaws with Bolt all day. But, at the same time, I really can't bring myself to dislike this movie that much, because God, this movie is just so damn cute. What can I say? You make a movie with cute animals being cute, and I'm gonna like it. Okay, sure, I do wish that this movie wasn't so anti-cat, but apart from that, I just enjoyed seeing all the cute, wacky hijinks present on this adventure. And alongside the cuteness, I definitely thought that the film was at its best when it was allowed to actually have fun with its ridiculous premise. My favourite parts of the movie were all the scenes where the various cats present just messed around with Bolt, whether it's Calico's cats who pretend to act all evil, or Mittens taunting Bolt with the styrofoam! It's great. In fact, speaking of Mittens, I actually quite liked her. Okay, sure, her New York accent is a little bit grating, and she does feel a bit like the prototype Kitty Softballs from her character design, all the way down to the fact that she was declawed. PSA, don't declaw your cats. However, apart from that, I found her to be the most consistently entertaining character for me. Plus, she's a frickin' mood, it's great. She also did her job well as the more normal, reasonable character in a film full of loons, and that status made her a lot more memorable for me. I also thought that some of the other side peeps, like the pigeons, were quite funny. In fact, I'd actually say that this is quite a funny film at many points, and, even though it definitely drags, I still call the overall package pretty entertaining. This is why I can understand why people may love this movie. If I was more nostalgic for it, then I'm certain that I'd love it too, in spite of how stupid it can be at points. I would normally call this one of Disney's most mediocre films, but the more that I think back on it, the more that I realise how much I did actually enjoy watching it. Maybe if I lose some of my cynicism, it could be ranked higher, but alas, it remained comfortably at this point in the list.
There's always a twist, there's always a twist, there's always a twist at the end.
Big Hero 6 is yet another Disney film which is in equal parts mediocre, yet really enjoyable at the same time. Like, I know that this movie has issues up the ass, and trust me, I'll get around to talking about them, but at the same time, I can't help but enjoy this film as it does have a lot of great elements to it, particularly regarding its emotional moments. Seriously, I was still emotionally invested in this movie at many points, in spite of the fact that I'm not mad on the overall package, and that's something that's worth highlighting within my praise for this film's good elements. As a whole, I think it's safe for me to say that this movie is easily at its best whenever it involves Tadashi in some way, and I'm not just referring to those opening scenes. But I'll start by talking about those opening scenes nonetheless. What I really love about Tadashi within these scenes is his unbelievably caring brotherly bond to Hiro. He is always trying to encourage his brother to do greater things in his life, and he's the main source of inspiration for Hiro. Seeing these two together is honestly so sweet, but it's a very believable dynamic as well. They've got the right level of sibling banter that you would expect, and I just loved every scene with them together. I truly buy their bond with each other and how it was most likely strengthened after the death of their parents. Kinda like Onward in a way, but even better as Tadashi is better than Barley. It all just feels so natural to this film, and I can honestly watch these two encourage each other as they make their way through life for hours. So imagine my devastation when Tadashi dies! Yeah, this moment really shocked me when I first saw it back in 2014, and honestly, I still think it's really effective even now. After around 20 or so minutes of build-up where we can see how much the two characters truly care for each other and how much Hiro needs Tadashi to help him out, it becomes even more upsetting than usual when Tadashi's life is cut short and Hiro loses the one who truly cared for him the most. And then the rest of the film has a lot of fantastic elements to it which are related to themes of grief and how different people can be consumed by it in different ways. I feel like the portrayal of Hiro's grief within this movie was really well handled and realistic. He essentially distances himself from the outside world and from his friends by staying in his room all day and barely eating. He's just generally struggling to process what's happened, and he's only able to feel somewhat happy again when he finds something to take his mind off of everything. But when he's reminded of Tadashi again after learning that his death was ultimately avoidable, he becomes absolutely furious to the point that he resorts to violence. And then this all leads to the phenomenal Tadashi is here scene, where Hiro watches old videos of Tadashi that fully allows him to come to terms with what happened, which means that he can successfully move on. It's such a beautiful scene, and I'm mad at myself for forgetting about it until this rewatch. So yeah, almost every time Tadashi is shown or mentioned, the film becomes really great. And that's not the only good part of the movie, as I also love Baymax. Obviously, I think it's fair to say that we all love Baymax. He's hilarious and huggable and just great. I also kinda liked the world building within this film. Like, it's definitely an odd choice to create this fictional hybrid between San Francisco and Tokyo, but I kinda like it. It's certainly a unique aesthetic, and I think that explicitly setting this film in a fictional location helps to make the advanced technology feel more grounded and natural to the story, which is obviously important for such a technological story. Speaking of which, the technology is really cool to see here. The robots were cool, and all the scenes where Hiro made some stuff were really satisfying for me. And speaking of those scenes, that Fall Out Boy song which plays during the montage in the middle of this movie absolutely slaps. Why don't more people talk about it? I was headbanging along to it so much. As a whole, there is so much to like about this movie, which is why I am so mad and annoyed that it drops the ball in so many key parts, specifically related to the plot and some of the characters. Let's get the big issue out of the way first. You all know what I'm about to say, don't you? Professor Callahan is a terrible villain, one of the worst Disney villains ever in fact. Now, the problem with Callahan isn't the fact that he's a twist villain. In fact, dare I say that the twist itself was decent? Well, decent by Disney standards. To be honest, I'm only really saying that as decent because parts of his true intentions were somewhat foreshadowed early on in the film, as can be seen through his interactions with Cray, which thus makes the film quite interesting on a rewatch. These little hints to his true intentions aren't much, but it's better than some of the other villains on this list, so I'll take what I can get. The actual problem with Callahan, though, is the fact that I can't take him seriously because he's a huge idiot! Seriously, he is. This dude should be one of the smartest people in San Francisco. He's the person you need to impress in order to get into nerd school after all. Yet despite being set up as a smart guy, his plan is absolutely brain dead. This dude wants revenge against Cray because Cray's ignorance led to Callahan losing his daughter through a portal. Yet, in order to achieve his vengeance, he goes through the trouble of rebuilding the same portal, and he doesn't even go in it. Dude, your daughter is alive in there. I know he wouldn't have known that fact yet, but do you seriously think that any loving, grieving father would care about that? No, they wouldn't. They would either go in the portal themselves, or they would send something in to try and find their missing family member. Either way, they would do something productive with that portal. No normal person would prioritize pointless revenge over taking action to potentially save their daughter. It's so dumb that he has the ability to potentially fix his problem, yet he just doesn't do it. Instead, he puts everything on hold and tries to destroy Cray's new building, yet all that does is make the rescue for Abigail 10 times harder. You dumbass!
So you've had the portal that your daughter was trapped in this whole time, and you haven't even bothered to look inside to see if she's still alive? And your plan was then to suck up an entire building into that same portal, making it nearly impossible for her rescue?
Now, the reason for why this annoys me so much is because the film very clearly wants us to feel sorry for this guy. There's obvious parallels between his grief and Hero's, and I feel like the film wanted to show the dark side of grief, and how it can cause people to act out in aggressive and unjust ways. But I just find it hard to believe that anyone would resort to this stupid act of revenge when there was a solution to the problem right there! I know anger is one of the 5 stages of grief and everything, but do you know what comes before it? Denial. Denial in this context would be Callahan denying the universe the chance to let Abigail die. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that an actual grieving father like Callahan would prioritize trying to find a solution to his issue first, and would only get angry when there's no possible way to bring her back. So yeah, the stupidity and unbelievable nature of Callahan's actions and motivation make the sympathetic elements of his character fall flat. Oh, and this is without mentioning the infamous "that was his mistake" line. Ugh. Now, I know that this moment has become a big meme thanks to the Crabman. However, I think that because of that fact, everyone's kind of forgotten why the line is bad, and why it became a meme. Basically, it became a meme because it is the most backwards line in the entire movie, as it completely runs counter to everything the film aimed to achieve. The film wants us to sympathise with this grieving father, but we can't do that when he was inadvertently responsible for the death of Tadashi, and then showed literally no empathy for it, and instead decided to victim blame. What the hell, dude? You liked Tadashi, and you liked Hero. Why are you being such a prick when you're not even mad at them? You're mad at Cray, and Cray only. It wasn't Hero's fault that Abigail is gone, so why are you trying to kill him? This line made it clear to me that Callahan was going to become nothing more than a generic bad guy for the rest of the film, despite the fact that the story very clearly wanted to make him more deep and complex, but it just didn't work in execution. Either make him a pure evil villain, or redeem him. Pick a lane. If you want to go down the redemption route, then first of all, make him feel guilty for Tadashi's death, and then have him come to terms with what he's doing before he stops himself from acting out in anger. Have him realise that his anger and grief is clouding his better judgment. Maybe by that point I can forgive some of his stupid actions. And if you want the climax to be exciting yet still have Callahan redeem himself, I don't know, have Cray be more evil so he can act as a final threat. He's a businessman, he's halfway to being a villain anyway. I don't really care what you do, just please fix Callahan, because that really is where most of my problems with this movie come from. Oh, and alongside being a poorly written character, I think that Callahan actually makes the story a lot worse as well. Seriously, my issues with Callahan make so many parts of the movie hard to engage with, because it's so easy to pick holes in what I'm watching. Not to mention, the earlier scenes are nowhere near as satisfying on a rewatch, because there's not really much to latch onto when we're just watching Callahan as Mr. Kabuki. Because in these scenes, he's just the bad guy rather than a complex antagonist. Maybe make it so that in these scenes, he actually wants to help Hero and the gang, but they don't realise that's what he's doing. Like, I don't know, do something similar to what Paranorman did. It just would have made things a lot more compelling on a rewatch, and would have made the overall package less stupid. I don't know, I'm spitballing ideas here, but you see the issue, right? Also, I really don't like how much this movie plays up Cray as the red herring villain. Like, Mr. Kabuki is so obviously not going to be Cray, that even I knew this was a red herring back when I first saw this film at 8 years old. Wow, was it really that long ago? Either way, I swear that Simon Skinner from Hot Fuzz was played up less. All of this, just ironically enough, made the film more predictable, despite the fact that it was trying to be less predictable. Yeah, I just don't really like the story for this movie as a whole, and due to that fact, I find it hard to engage with this film at many points, which thus leaves me feeling kinda bored throughout. But the stuff around Callahan isn't the only major problem here, as I also wasn't really into the superhero stuff. It's abundantly clear that this movie was trying so hard to capitalise off of the MCU's newfound popularity back in the early 2010s, so much so that they even got a Stan Lee cameo. But, unlike The Incredibles, it doesn't really do anything interesting or subversive with the genre. It's simply just a superhero movie with some goofy characters plunked into a subpar story. It's not a fresh take on the genre at all, and instead feels more like it belongs with the generic C-tier Marvel movies like Ant-Man or something. Oh, and speaking of those goofy characters, I do not care for the side cast at all. I feel nothing towards Honey Lemon. Gogo forced me to Google her name because I completely forgot about her. Wasabi is kinda relatable, I guess, but also kinda bland. And TJ Miller, I hate him. I've recently come to the realization that I hate TJ Miller and most things that he's in, as I just find him incredibly grating and annoying on the whole. And these feelings extend to this version as well. Nothing he ever said was charming or funny. I really wish this movie was focused entirely on Hero, Baymax, and maybe one other person. Not 4 other blank slates. This is my way of saying that Big Hero 3 would have been better. So yeah, now you understand what I mean when I say that Big Hero 6 has issues up the ass. Is it a bad movie? No, not at all. It's got too many good elements to it for me to call the film bad. In fact, I'd call it decent overall. But it really could have been so much more if its script, especially regarding Callahan, was ironed out that bit more. The removal of TJ Miller would have also helped this film as well, but it's mostly just Callahan for me. Still, Baymax and Tadashi carry this movie, and on the whole, it's at least more interesting and memorable than The Box Trolls, which was also nominated alongside it, even if Big Hero 6 does have a worse villain. If it wasn't obvious enough though, this film did not in a million years deserve to win the Oscar, and the Lego Movie was still snubbed from a nomination. It's pretty clear to me that by this point in the category's existence, Disney bias was ever present amongst the Academy. Oh well, at least the film in question is still decent. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go back to listening to some Fall Out Boy.
Playing croquet without a care in the world. A frog was there.
Before starting this marathon, I had a feeling that one of the best batches of films from this whole list was the 2009 selection. Not only does it contain many absolute favourites of mine, but, based off of my incomplete knowledge of the films, I assumed that all 5 of the movies nominated were bangers. However, whilst 2009 still has one of the best batches of films from this list, I wouldn't quite call it the best selection, as I, controversially, thought that one of the 5 movies nominated was quite mediocre. And the mediocre film in question was The Princess and the Frog. Now, this is definitely still a decent movie, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. But damn it, I wanted to like this movie so much more, but it was too much of a mixed bag for me to truly love it. It's got great elements, don't get me wrong, but there's just so much that I took issue with, which meant that I couldn't really bring myself to rank it that much higher. Which will become a problem for me when people see what films I have ranked higher on this list. Oh boy, the comments will be fun, but we'll get to that when we get to that. As it stands though, this film misses the mark for me in so many frustrating ways, because, just like with Brother Bear and Brave, I really do see the potential here, and I understand why people like it. I mean, I was honestly loving it during its first act. It was fun, it set everything up nicely, the songs were bangers, and Tiana was presented as someone who I personally found very relatable and likable. She's someone who always feels the need to work because of her high ambitions and goals for the future. Yeah, she's just like me for real. I physically cannot take a lazy day without feeling like I'm wasting my time. I understand the feelings of wanting to be busy and working hard towards a greater goal, just like Tiana did for the goal of opening her restaurant. And alongside Tiana being great, I was also loving Dr. Facilier as the villain. He was smooth, cunning, Friends on the Other Side was a goated song, and Keith David is just amazing. So yeah, I was loving everything here, and I couldn't wait to watch the rest of the movie with the very relatable Tiana, and then she becomes a frog. Why? Why? Look, I love animal transformation, but come on, stop throwing it in when you don't need to. Oh well, maybe the film can still be interesting while she's a frog. Nope! Everything good that the film has set up beforehand is just completely thrown out of the window altogether as soon as Naveen and Tiana go to the bayou, as the movie then turns into your standard kids movie affair with a ton of unfunny jokes. Tiana's dreams are not explored that much further until the very end, and I just don't get why she had to become a frog. Compare that to Brother Bear, where Kenai becoming a bear was important for the underlying narrative, as he had to atone for what he did to a bear. And if you want another example of this storyline being done well, just look at this film. Prince Naveen also became a frog, but that made sense because he was an asshole who needed to be humbled. Becoming a frog was a way to bring him down to a level where he isn't respected like he used to be, and that humbles him and allows him to grow. Yet Tiana did nothing wrong and didn't deserve this. Why did she turn? But it's not just the frog thing which I take issue with here, as the whole middle of this movie is just not good. The pacing slows to an absolute crawl here, as the characters just kinda mosey on around this dank looking bayou when not much really happens. The biggest crime committed by this film though, especially in these scenes, is the fact that this movie is just not funny. Like seriously, this is one of the least funny non-Ralph Breaks the Internet Disney movies which I've seen in a long while. I honestly got way more laughs out of Brother Bear and Big Hero 6 by comparison, even if I thought they were weaker movies. Now, I'm not saying that this is the worst Disney movie comedically or anything, as there are definitely worse, but I haven't watched them in a while, so this is just fresher in my mind. There's just so many jokes which did not land for me here, and if they did, maybe I wouldn't find the middle act so boring, as I would be a lot more entertained. I think that the main problem I had with the comedy here was the fact that I don't really like Disney slapstick. Now, I love slapstick normally. I mean, I am a Buster Keaton, Fawlty Towers and Goes Wrong show fan after all. However, in Disney movies, I often find the slapstick way too over the top and goofy, to the point that it misses the mark and becomes more stupid and annoying rather than funny. The punts don't feel as painful as they should do because they're so over the top and frequent, and that makes them not as funny. Meanwhile, whilst Buster Keaton can also be over the top, there's a level of finesse with his films which make them feel more quirky rather than stupid, and that makes them funnier. Also, I think live action slapstick may just be funnier than animated slapstick, as physical schadenfreude is way stronger. But, animated slapstick can still be really funny, when used sparingly and alongside plenty of well-written jokes. But Disney slapstick is often used way too much for my liking, to the point that it becomes boring and repetitive. Now, The Princess and the Frog isn't the only film where this is a problem, as it is also something which I take issue with in many other Disney films, including films I actually love, such as Beauty and the Beast. It's a fantastic movie throughout, but some of the jokes of LeFou getting punched don't really work for me. Although that's literally the only criticism that I have of that movie, and to be fair, that is just one minor character. However, the unfunny slapstick is everywhere in The Princess and the Frog, and I got so sick of it after a while. By the halfway mark of this movie, I started to long for Buster Keaton to just swoop in and show him how it's done. And alongside the poor slapstick, there's also a lot of cringy butt jokes.
Damn, boy!
And overall, there's a lack of good, humorous dialogue, which is really needed in a lot of comedies. In saying all of that though, I loved Lewis. He was the one part of the movie to consistently get a laugh out of me, and I just thought that he was a legend. Ryan Gosling, eat your heart out. We've got our favourite jazz-playing alligator over here. In fact, the topic of Lewis leads me on nicely to my main positive with the film. I think that the characters are what really carry this movie during some of its duller moments. I already said that I liked Tiana in the opening, and whilst I was disappointed by the loss of some of her best attributes, she was still likeable, resourceful, and entertaining throughout the rest of the runtime, and she had a great dynamic with Naveen. Speaking of which, I think Naveen went through a solid character arc. It was a nice gradual showcase of increased likability, and his changed personality by the end felt earned. Plus, I felt like his romance with Tiana was very sweet, and I definitely did want to see the pair of them get together by the end. And alongside the protagonist, I have to mention Dr. Facilier again. He's just a delight to watch in every scene, and his crazy shenanigans with Naveen's servant, who I've forgotten the name of, was more entertaining than any of the non-Lewis Bayou scenes. Plus, Facilier had an absolutely kick-ass villain death. However, I will still admit that some of the other characters didn't entirely do it for me. Mama Odie was a pretty nothing character and wasn't funny at all, and Ray was just okay. To be fair, I assumed that I would hate Ray, so me finding him just okay was actually a positive surprise for me. Although, I admittedly did still laugh when Facilier stepped on him though. I swear that's not me being sadistic, I just chuckled at how nonchalant Facilier was in disposing of him. So yeah, The Princess and the Frog is easily one of the most mixed films on this list, with a lot that I take issue with. I would normally put this film on the same level as the likes of Brother Bear and Brave, because I honestly felt similarly towards all of them, as they were all films with strong aspects and a lot of promise at the start, which were eventually let down by boring as hell middles after a main character gets turned into an animal. However, I ended up ranking this film a little bit higher because there were some additional things here which I really liked. First of all, I love the animation. It's real nice, and I loved how creative and stylized they got within the songs, especially in Almost There and Friends on the Other Side. Speaking of which, the music was consistently really great here. The songs slap, and the jazz soundtrack was always great to jam out to. What can I say? I like jazz. And finally, this film doesn't annoy me as much as some of the other mixed movies. I definitely see some things here which could have been done better, but I equally don't see the damaged remnants of a mature tale about grief, or a profound story about parenting and the treatment of women. Instead, I look at what this movie could have been, and all I see is a more successfully comedic and entertaining version of almost the exact same movie, but with Tiana remaining human in order to give more focus to a dream. As a result, I feel like The Princess and the Frog was a lot closer to reaching its full potential, which thus meant that I ended up liking it more. Plus, Lewis is the most epic character ever created. Overall, I say that this was a decent movie with some great elements, alongside some boring and painfully unfunny elements. It could have been a lot better for me, and I doubt I'll rewatch it soon, but I can see the appeal for so many people. Although, I am so mad that Mary and Max was snubbed for a nomination in favour of this film. This is a forgettable and mediocre Disney movie, whilst Mary and Max is one of the best damn movies I've ever seen in my whole life. God damn you, Academy, and your Disney bias. So yeah, go and watch Mary and Max, and if you do that, you hopefully won't notice what films I controversially ranked above The Princess and the Frog. Remember, it's all just opinions at the end of the day.
'Tis but a scratch. A scratch? Your arm's off. No, it isn't.
And we've returned to the realm of decently popular movies that I don't love, which aren't bad at all, and are instead just not my kind of thing. However, the reasons for why I didn't connect much with I Lost My Body are very different to my reasons for not connecting with Mirai. By contrast, I did not get a headache from watching I Lost My Body. Instead, I just didn't really connect with the film much because I didn't fully get what it was going for half the time. You see, this is the first of many films on this list which you could categorize as being arthousey. I mean, I suppose you could class Chico and Rita as an art house film as well, but I'm not going to because I don't care. Now, the whole point of an art house movie is to be unconventional or metaphorical, and just generally not all that plot focused. They are created with the express purpose of alienating casual audiences in order to provide everyone else with something, richer. They can tackle more unique themes and will do so in a very unique way. These movies can sometimes be really low-key and normal feeling, or they can be super weird and experimental, and the latter example is often the much more polarizing option, and is often the one which doesn't always work well. Although, even if they fail, they're still very memorable at the bare minimum. But, the side effect which comes from these more unique, abstract art house movies is the fact that, whilst there will be many who adore them, there will always be equally as many people who can't really get into them for a variety of reasons. Now, obviously we all know that opinions are subjective, but they are even more subjective than usual when you're talking about these art house movies, because they often only attract ultra-specific audiences whilst alienating others. But this is a good thing, as the ones who get it really love it, and just because you don't like this one weird movie, doesn't mean you'll necessarily not like another. And this is no different for me. There are plenty of weird art housey movies that I absolutely adore, such as Barton Fink, Donnie Darko, and, if you want an animated example, The Wolf House. However, I know plenty of people who don't like these movies, and that's fine. I get why they're not for everyone. That's the whole point. And on the flip side, there's plenty of weird movies which so many other people love that I couldn't personally get into, and many examples of this will be shown on this list. There's just no consistency when it comes to how I feel about these types of movies. It all depends upon the content and the execution of their ideas and how they appeal to your personal taste. Now, the reason for why I'm saying all of this is so that you can all understand why some of the more arthousey movies on this list have quite middling rankings, whilst others are ranked a lot higher. It's all based upon my own subjective views, opinions, and readings, and some films just click with me better than others. But sadly, I Lost My Body was a film which didn't really click with me for a couple of reasons, but I can understand why someone may love it as it is very interesting. Like basically every other weird art house movie on this list, I appreciate and respect the film a lot, even if I didn't love it, as it was hampered by several big flaws for me. Honestly, I think that the biggest kicker for me was the main dual narrative present here. Yes, this movie has a dual narrative, specifically one which takes place over two different points in time, just like The Godfather Part 2. But instead of being between two men, it's between a man and his hand. TLDR, this guy, Nefel, accidentally cut his hand off, and this is implied at the very start of the film, but isn't fully shown until near the end. And basically, the film shows Nefel's life before the incident as he gets a job to hang out with a girl he likes. But it constantly cuts to the events after the incident, which features his hand somehow coming to life and trekking across the land to reunite with the rest of the body. So yeah, the structure is very unique and non-linear, very Christopher Nolan in a way, and I will hand it to this movie. The idea definitely intrigued me at first. It's definitely a bizarre concept, but I was very curious to see where they would go with this idea of a severed hand walking around no harm done. But, in spite of my curiosity, the truth is that I found most of the hand stuff really uninteresting, and after a while, I began questioning why it was even in the film in the first place. Now, the thing is, despite the fact that I am incredibly thick, I understood what the hand stuff represented. It's all about longing for a part of yourself which you lost. In this case, the idea is shown physically through a severed hand longing to be reunited with the rest of the body, but it also symbolically represents Nefel's feelings within the film. It's very clear that he's got a miserable life with a shitty job, a shitty apartment, and a shitty roommate, and we are also explicitly shown that he lost his parents at a young age. He's clearly not doing great, which is why he jumps at the opportunity to potentially be with a girl he likes, as it will make him happy. He lost his innocence and his happiness, and he's willing to do anything to get it back, and that explains his slightly dodgy actions within the main narrative, which I will get to later. Now, this is all fine and good. In fact, the themes are one of the best parts of the whole movie for me. However, I kinda understood all of this after just the first few scenes with the hand. The flashback is shown really early on, and it's pretty obvious that the hand does in fact belong to Nefel due to things like the visual motif of the mole, which makes it clear that the hands are indeed one and the same. This allowed me to put the pieces of the film together early on, and it left me intrigued over how the hand became removed from the body. However, these early reveals equally led to me not really caring much for all the wacky hand shenanigans moving forward. So much of this movie is just the hand walking around various places and getting into these random antics. It hides under a train, dances on ice, scares the shit out of a blind piano player who we never see again, and nothing here feels important to the rest of the film. These scenes honestly just drag on for me. I got what they were going for symbolically, but I didn't really care about the actual shenanigans which are happening on screen. Maybe there's some deeper reasons which you can take from these later scenes, but I couldn't personally figure them out. Instead, I was just kind of bored throughout most of this storyline, and that sucks because it takes up a big percentage of the film's runtime. I just didn't really know what the film was going for with these scenes, and anytime the hand did show up again, I found myself just patiently waiting for the film to cut back to the main stuff with Nefel. On the whole, the main Nefel stuff was just a lot better and more engaging for me. In fact, I kind of want to get into my main positives of the film now, and one of the big ones that I had was that I am really happy that Nefel didn't get the girl by the end, and instead, the film had an imperfect ending. The truth is, Nefel's a bit of a creep. He only became interested in Gabrielle after one exchange over a pizza, an exchange where they didn't even see face to face. Yet, despite that fact, Nefel was so desperate that he decided to track down Gabrielle through the phone book, and eventually ended up following her to her father's workshop, where he became the new intern there, just so that he could be with Gabrielle more. That's dodgy on so many levels. He's straight up stalking this random girl and also manipulating her sick father. However, whilst we understand why he's doing this, the film never justifies his actions, and, as I said, it ends with Gabrielle rejecting him when she finds out the truth, and rightfully calls him out for his shitty behaviour. I like how the film handles this. It's a lot healthier and more realistic, and I respect the film for being willing to portray a dodgy romance and actually commit to the bit, unlike some other movies I know. The rejection was just a really good scene on the whole, and it was made even better by the fact that it featured Nefel quoting Lee Van Cleef in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly before going on to call it his favourite film. Look, I know the guy's a bit of a creep, but come on, he does at least have good film taste. Anywho, these great scenes also lead in well to the climax of the film. Oh boy, this scene. I genuinely don't know how much I can actually show of this scene without YouTube getting angry with me. That's not very handy, is it? I guess I'll just have to give you the Cliff Notes version of the scene then. TLDR, girl said no, he said oh, chopped off his hand and said righty-o. Well, okay, he didn't chop off his hand intentionally, but Gabrielle's rejection did lead to a night of drinking, and eventually Nefel started operating dangerous machinery whilst hungover, which is never a good idea. But alas, Nefel thought there was no harm in trying to use the saw anyway, and yeah, this horrific scene was certainly very effective. Although, we definitely had a feeling that this was coming from the very start. As I said, it's obvious that the hand belonged to Nefel, and the film opens with the incident itself in a kind of Guillermo del Toro way. But as soon as I saw saw and a hungover Nefel, my anxiety shot through the roof as I knew exactly what was going to happen. Let me tell you, I have not felt this much anxiety whilst watching a film since I saw the Final Destination movies. In fact, I'd argue that this scene has a very similar kind of tension to the Final Destination movies, as we just know that this horrific accident is going to happen, but we don't know when and in what way, and that's where the terror comes in. Either way, it was horrific. As I said, I can't show it on YouTube for obvious reasons, but I'm sure you can imagine how bad it was. But yeah, I definitely think that was an effective way to resolve all of the questions that we had up to this point. I do still think that the hand subplot is really uninteresting, but this was a nice resolution to it. and the actual ending of the film was quite interesting, I feel. I'll admit that I didn't fully get what the ending meant, and by the time the credits rolled, it did feel a bit sudden, but that's definitely more of a me problem, as the final scene itself was still a good one. It was quite cool to see the film make this super cool jump, but the main thing which I loved here was, surprisingly enough, the sound design. Like, the way that the microphone was used whilst Gabrielle was listening to it was really cool, particularly when it contrasted to the actual events that were being recorded. In fact, going back to more general points, I think that the film is very technically impressive throughout. The animation style is quite unique, but I liked it, the music was consistently excellent, the aforementioned sound design was really noticeably impressive, and as a whole, this film has a very unique style to it when it comes to its presentation. The flashbacks were effective, and the visuals as a whole communicated things very well. So I'd say that overall, I Lost My Body is a very interesting film for a lot of reasons. Its main themes and ideas are unique and contribute to some well realised characters, it's got a lot of cool technical attributes, and it's certainly very memorable. But I didn't get everything it was going for, and I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't slightly bored for half the film. Yeah, it really is just this drawn out subplot which lets things down for me. The hand stuff just ruins the pacing, and it really takes me out of my engagement for the main non-romance story. Like, I get the vision, but I just couldn't fully align myself to it. But if others could get a lot out of this movie, that's cool. I wish I loved it too. But alas, I only loved parts of it and didn't get too much out of it in the long run. It definitely deserved a nomination though, especially by Frozen 2, but it's probably not one which I'll go back to.
It's cold outside, there's no kind of atmosphere, I'm more on less.
Oh, Frozen. Frozen, Frozen, Frozen. Let me tell you, I still have frequent nightmares about the Frozen epidemic of the mid-2010s. You'll remember that time, don't you? The time where you would turn on any radio station and immediately get blasted with "Let it go, let it go." I know I can't sing, but you get the idea, I'm not playing the copyrighted version. Now I know I said a while back that Despicable Me 2 felt like the much bigger movie to childhood me, but that personal perspective doesn't change the fact that Frozen was still everywhere back in the day. It earned a shit ton of money, merchandising dominated your average supermarket, and the songs gave the aforementioned radio station free content for about a year straight. It was the closest that our society came to reliving 1997, because I imagine that Let It Go was the 2010s equivalent of My Heart Will Go On. So yeah, this movie was ever present within our pop culture, and that's a bit of a problem when talking about the film now. You see, Frozen isn't the greatest movie of all time, and I'll talk about its many flaws in a bit. However, despite that, it was a billion-dollar hit which everyone was talking about. Therefore, it is completely understandable why someone may hate this film solely because they were sick of seeing it everywhere when it wasn't even good enough to warrant its popularity. Tangled is just this movie but better after all, and that wasn't anywhere near as big of a hit. And so, as a result of these factors, it can be incredibly hard to look at this movie objectively on its own merits without considering its cultural impact as well. However, when I rewatched this film for the first time in forever for this marathon, I really tried hard to judge this movie as its own thing. And honestly, I think that I was successful in doing that, as I actually found myself enjoying this film quite a bit more than I remembered. As I said, it still has plenty of flaws, but there was equally a lot that I really appreciated here. In fact, after thinking about it for a while, I think I may actually start by talking about the songs first, because they honestly perfectly reflect my opinions on the movie as a whole. The quality of the songs vary greatly, which perfectly reflects the fact that within this movie, there are some terrible moments, but also a lot of moments that I do equally really like. So yeah, the songs are the easiest starting point. Also, they're the most culturally relevant part of the movie, so I might as well just get them out of the way first. Alright then, let's start by talking about the big song. I personally think that Let It Go is a really, really great song. Now yes, it was definitely overplayed when it came out, but I can honestly look at the song more objectively nowadays, as I don't think I've actually listened to it in well over a year, and because of that fact, I can now confidently call it a banger song. In fact, I was honestly singing along to it willingly on this latest rewatch, because it's just really, really great to listen to. Yeah, I love this song, sue me. I'm also a big fan of Love is an Open Door. Whilst it is slightly undercut by the twist with Hans, I still think that is one of the best Disney romance songs. The opening song is also really cool, get it? And both versions of For the First Time in Forever are fantastic. So yeah, there's some great music here. But at the same time, Do You Want to Build a Snowman and In Summer are both really annoying, and Fixer Upper might hold the title of being the single worst Disney song ever made.
Watch out, world, here I are.
Okay, the worst Disney song to come out before Wish. Nonetheless, I was still surprised by how horrible Fixer Upper actually was. The lyrics are awful, it's way too inappropriate considering the context of the film, it's complete filler, I just hate it. Either way, I'd still say that overall, the songs within this movie range from being really good and overhated to real bad, and my fluctuating opinions on this aspect of the movie reflects the film as a whole. There are some fantastic songs alongside some terrible ones, and the terrible ones probably lowered the average person's opinion on the soundtrack as a whole. And this perfectly reflects the fact that there are a lot of great, underappreciated elements within this movie, which allow me to call it good overall. But there's also some really bad stuff here as well, which I imagine lowered the average person's opinion on the movie as a whole. And with this point in mind, let's discuss these major flaws now so that we can end this segment on a much more positive note. Alright, first bad thing. Hans. Yep, just like Callahan, Hans has been mean to shit due to being a terrible twist villain, and all of the memes about him are absolutely right as he is real bad. Granted, he doesn't annoy me as much as Callahan, as he is still, you know, a villain who we aren't meant to feel misguided sympathy towards. Plus, his greedy motivations do make sense somewhat. However, his plan is so dumb. I always hate it when villains just leave the protagonist alone and expect them to not survive, as whenever you do that, you are practically baiting the universe to help them escape.
Wait, aren't you even gonna watch them? They could get away.
No. I'm going to leave them alone and not actually witness them dying. I'm just going to assume it all went to plan. What?
But the real kicker for Hans is the lack of build-up towards his evil intent. Foreshadowing a twist is one of the most important parts of creating a twist. It allows for an audience to pick up on all the subtle clues hidden throughout on subsequent viewings. It is not meant to be a shock of the moment kind of thing. It is meant to be a hidden in plain sight kind of thing, where you notice the clues after you know where to look. Yet with Hans, not only are there no hints towards his evil intentions, his actions actually directly contradict the twist. By the end of the movie, he wants to kill Elsa, yet earlier, he is actively seen trying to save her at various points. I mean, I know you could just say that the chandelier shot was done to try and kill Elsa, but I think that a straight crossbow would have been a lot more effective. I honestly think that the chandelier was just an accident and Hans let out was in a Del Boy. And all of this is without mentioning this earlier moment in the film where he smiles to himself after meeting Anna for the first time. That is not the face that an evil plotter makes themselves. That's the face of a gentleman. I mean, I suppose his nice exterior was kind of the point as it made the twist more shocking, but I think that this movie went too far in the other direction to the point that the twist made no sense to me. So yeah, I don't like Hans. I like the idea of him and how he's a subversion of the love at first sight trope, but it kind of felt like the film was trying too hard to push this idea, to the point that I forgot how to write a competent villain. And speaking of villains, I'm not a fan of the red herring villain in the form of the Duke of Weaselton.
Weaselton!
My apologies. He just felt like a really pointless inclusion. And on the subject of pointless, yeah, there are a lot of filler scenes throughout the middle of this film. Like, the whole section of the movie set between Anna leaving Elsa's palace and arriving back in Arendelle goes on for way too long, with the rock troll scene especially being incredibly fillery with an aforementioned terrible song to go alongside it. And finally, I think that the tone is pretty inconsistent here. Like, whenever the film is trying to take itself seriously, it feels the need to shoehorn in a ton of lame jokes, such as with Olaf in the final act. Now, I wouldn't say that I dislike Olaf, as he does have some funny moments here and there, but by the final act, his presence and jokes really aren't that welcome anymore. But the worst case of tonal issues comes from, once again, Fixer Upper, which is a pretty goofy song overall, which suddenly ends with Anna on the verge of dying. Okay? This tonal whiplash was way too strong, and it thus left me unsure of what I was actually meant to be feeling in the scene, and that made the dramatic moments a lot less effective for me. So yeah, between all of these problems, I can't exactly call Frozen one of Disney's best, which is why it was annoying that this film became as popular as it was. If Tangled was a super popular film, I don't think people would have minded as much, as Tangled is the way better film in every way. Anyway, that's enough negativity. Let's move on to the positives, as I honestly do still like Frozen for a lot of different reasons. For starters, I think that Anna is a really likeable and funny protagonist who I thoroughly enjoyed watching, and she's made even better when she's paired up with Kristoff, who's just an absolute legend himself. I love these two together, and their dynamic is everything I could possibly want from a main character dynamic. It's really great. Speaking of entertainment, I thought that this film was actually pretty consistently funny throughout the first half when the tone was meant to be lighter. The banter was top tier, and I especially loved the guy who said, hoo hoo. And on the topic of characters, I actually really like Elsa, and I don't entirely understand the criticisms for her character. Yes, she runs away from her problems and doesn't open up to people. But like, isn't that kind of the point? Doesn't she learn that this mindset is wrong as she develops and improves herself over time? Like, doesn't she go through an arc? Of course she's flawed at the start, but she changes by the end, right? Am I missing something? Because I really don't see anything wrong here. And this is without mentioning the fact that her flawed mindset is perfectly understandable when you take into consideration the way that she was brought up. Seriously, when you think about it, the parents really failed when trying to raise her, and I think that the blame for what happened within this movie should really be pinned on them. In fact, that's honestly the main reason for why I like Elsa as a character. I found it interesting to see the effects that misguided parenting can have on a child as they grow up. If they are treated as an other who constantly has to hide who they are, it's no wonder why they feel secluded and want to be alone where they can just let it go. Honestly, I find it quite relatable, and I know I'm not the only one, as my dad has consistently called Elsa his literally me character. Yeah, forget Patrick Bateman, Travis Bickle, and Drive Man. Elsa is a true Sigma female who my dad would happily call a literally me character. And you know what? I'm inclined to agree. God, what am I even saying? And alongside me liking Elsa as a character, I also love the emotional resolution to this film. Hans is still a dumb villain, but I nonetheless appreciated the message of the film all about how family love, especially one between siblings, is truly the strongest love of all. Elsa's love and care for Anna, what's not immediately obvious on the outside, is nonetheless a strong feeling on the inside, and is the thing which ultimately saves Anna. It's just really sweet and heartwarming, and it's a nice, less stupid way to subvert classic Disney tropes, with this trope being the love saves the day ending. So yeah, overall, there is a lot that I really like from Frozen. It's got great characters, plenty of solid jokes, a lot of heart, some good messages, and at least half of the songs are bangers. Sadly, the other half of the songs are kinda crap, the tone is inconsistent a lot of the time, and the villain is awful. So as a result of all these factors, I can't really call Frozen anything more than just good. But still, it's a lot better than I think a lot of people give it credit for, so I'd therefore recommend giving it another watch from a slightly less cynical perspective, now that over a decade has passed since the Frozen hype train. Jesus Christ, was it really that long ago? Oh god, that made me feel really old. Let's not worry about that. I'll just say for now that whilst this film deserved a nomination, it definitely did not deserve to win in comparison to two other nominees which I can't wait to discuss with you all later. But still, I like Frozen. I'm sorry for preferring it to The Princess and the Frog, but I honestly found this film way more interesting and funny, even if the songs and animation aren't as good. Look, I'll admit it, I enjoy Incredibles too. Is it an incredibly flawed movie? Absolutely. Do I understand why others hate it? 100%. Do I have flaws with it? Hell yeah. But at the end of the day, this is a movie that I still enjoy watching every time I go back to it. Even if I go into a rewatch expecting to hate it, I still end up liking it. So, yeah, sorry that this is ranked higher than The Princess and the Frog and I Lost My Body, but I personally enjoy this film a lot more. But I will still quickly run over the main flaws that I have before I go over what I did actually like about it. I won't spend too long on the flaws now, as you're probably aware of them all by now. First of all, Evelyn Dever is a terrible twist villain. She's an incredibly obvious twist, even down to her name literally being Evil Endeavor, and she's also just really stupid. Why would you go to the effort to make supers legal just so you can make them illegal again? Just do nothing and you'll be fine. Cut out the middleman. So yeah, that's the big problem that everyone likes to bring up, and I fully agree with this criticism. Alongside that, the plot is definitely quite rehashy, to the point that it sometimes feels exactly like the first movie, but with the main two roles switched over. Unlike Monsters University or Finding Dory, which I will fully defend as much as possible, I can't really argue that this film needed to exist. It doesn't really add much to the franchise. Even certain character arcs feel rehashed within this film, such as with Bob, who has to learn to value his family over his work. Again. Yeah, okay, these are all perfectly valid criticisms which I fully agree with, and I'll even add on one additional criticism which I don't always see brought up. I actually think that this movie looks worse than the original film which came out 14 years earlier. Now, I'm not saying that the original film looks perfect or anything, but by contrast, this movie just looks so off at many points. The art style for the Incredibles movies are very unique because they were initially created as a workaround to the technical limitations present back in the early 2000s. The humans have unique shapes and proportions, and the backgrounds are this unique mix of realism and style. It's very distinctly fictional, but in a way which feels real. However, with this sequel, They really tried hard to up the realism part, and that made it just look off in comparison to the more stylistic elements created for the original film. It's too hyper-realistic to fit into this world, and while some of the backgrounds and lighting look nice, some of the characters like this news anchor, or the new superheroes, and hell, even main characters like Bob, all look so weird. I really don't like how this film looks, and I prefer the older movie's visuals no matter how dated some parts may be. Anyway, due to all of these criticisms which I've listed off, it's really sounding like I should maybe rank this film lower as a result. But the truth is, there is still so much that I like here, and I will happily go back to this movie before anything ranks below it. In all honesty, I'm a bit weak when it comes to sequels to movies which I love. If I really love an original movie, I will always eat up a sequel no matter how rehashy or unnecessary they may be. As long as the film's entertaining enough and has the characters and worlds I like, I'll often still find myself enjoying it no matter how flawed they may be. That's no different with Incredibles 2. Spoilers for later on this list, but I love the original Incredibles movie a lot, which thus means that I get a lot of personal enjoyment out of the sequel, even if it is just more of the same. But hey, it's still got the characters I love, it's still got super fun action, it's still got Giacchino's score, and it's overall designed in a way to make me enjoy it, no matter how much my critical brain may disagree. So yeah, that's kind of the main reason for why I have this movie ranked higher than where many other people would place it. But putting all this negativity and pessimism aside, I do still think that there's a lot of really great parts of this movie, which I don't always hear brought up. First of all, I really appreciate the fact that Brad Bird still tried hard to make this a more mature movie. As we all know by now, Bird writes his films in a way which caters more towards adults in comparison to other Pixar films, and Incredibles 2 is no different. So many of the dialogue exchanges are really intelligent and well thought out, especially the stuff between Helen and Evelyn. It's hard to really explain, but their conversations feel different to what you would expect from a conversation scene in a Pixar movie, but it works really well for me. I may have issues with Evelyn as a character, but these scenes were great, and I will admit that they do provide for some great foreshadowing. And the mature nature of this film extend beyond the conversations and also apply to the main themes. Not only are there explicit criticisms towards politicians, which is always great to see, but the film as a whole has a lot of brilliant ideas related to media manipulation and fake news. The whole point of the Screenslaver is to create a scenario which will cause the public to turn on supers, because they don't know the full facts of why they are acting dangerous at the end. Screenslaver is using her own powers to manipulate what people see the supers as, and there's some clever symbolism through the fact that she uses literal hypnosis to alter the actions of different people, as it reflects the fact that bending a news story to make people believe what you want to believe is like its own form of brainwashing. It's a really neat parallel, but even alongside Screenslaver, the media is shown to play a major factor in this film, even at the very start. The journalists actively make the supers look bad after the Underminer incident, in spite of all they did to help, and that's what directly leads into the events of the film. It's all because of the media. This is a really important topic to discuss, and is prevalent now more than ever, but it's something which you don't often see covered in family movies and whatnot, because it is quite a complicated rabbit hole. But Brad Bird confidently handled the subject matter nonetheless, because he is an incredibly intelligent writer, and that's the main thing which keeps me interested within this movie. But alongside these really cool themes, I enjoy the film for a multitude of other reasons. The action is consistently excellent here, from the opening scene to the monorail chase, and the climax where the kids are on their own and have to fend off against all the hypnotized supers. That was a really suspenseful moment which massively increased the stakes in great ways. And alongside the action, the score is incredible as I said before, and the film as a whole is really entertaining. I have a lot of fun with Bob's antics at home, and the math is math scene makes me laugh out loud every time. Violet is also really relatable for me in this movie, arguably even more so than she was in the first movie, and the milk scene is just mwah, chef's kiss. But the main thing which I get the most enjoyment out of in this movie is, of course,
Hi, I'm Saul Goodman.
yay, it's Bob Odenkirk, baby! Now, I know what you're going to say. Jamie, are you telling me that you like this movie as much as you do solely because Bob Odenkirk plays one of the characters? Yes I do. I'm not even gonna hide it. I get way too much enjoyment listening to Bob Odenkirk as Winston Dever. Like, all I can hear is Saul Goodman, and that's just funny to me. I mean, granted, I do enjoy his character outside of that. I think he's quite entertaining, and I like how he isn't a twist villain as well, and is instead actually opposed to his sister's actions by the end. That makes him a bit more well-rounded, I feel. And actually, on that topic, I do want to go back to Evelyn for a minute, as I want to say that I don't think she's as bad a twist villain as Callahan, for instance. And that's for one simple reason. She still feels like the same character. Despite being antagonistic towards the supers, I like the fact that she still makes an effort to save her brother. Her actions are misguided, but she's not one-dimensionally evil, as she still has the humanity to not put her family in danger. So yeah, whilst I still have flaws with Evelyn, I've seen way worse villains, so she definitely doesn't ruin the film that much, as the good elements here more than make up for it. But I did still ultimately prefer watching her brother because Better Call Saul! Speaking of which, did you guys know that Jonathan Banks played Rick Dickerwood in this movie? He did this because the original voice actor passed away, but nonetheless, I just find it funny that Mike starred in this movie alongside Jimmy. When I was younger, I didn't notice the difference in actors, but after I learnt about that and got into Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, yeah, I can only hear Mike whenever Rick talks in this movie. I'm sorry. It's fun though. So yeah, my love for Better Call Saul and the original movie both helped to make this a much more enjoyable experience for me than it is for other people. So overall, I like this movie. It has issues, but I don't care. I just think that it's neat. It's also way less offensive than Ralph Breaks the Internet, and less painful than Mirai. So I prefer it to those 2018 movies.
Would you like to see a magic trick?
No!
To be honest, I thought that The Illusionist was a really dull and forgettable movie. Granted, I do think that Edward Norton and Paul Giamatti gave it their all here, especially Giamatti was pretty entertaining as his corrupt chief inspector. However, the story was nothing special, which made this film really boring as a result. A lot of people consider this film to be a kind of lesser version of Christopher Nolan's The Prestige, which is also a movie about magicians released in 2006, and I definitely have to agree with this statement because Nolan's film is way better. The Prestige is a narratively rich and compelling film with so much to unpack, whereas The Illusionist is a bland social commentary love story, which I could see in a million other places. The magic stuff was admittedly pretty cool, but that was all I really liked about the film, and to be honest, there wasn't enough magic for my liking. So yeah, I wouldn't really recommend it. Just watch The Prestige instead. Wait a minute. Oh crap, this is the wrong film! I was actually meant to talk about this French animated film from 2010 called The Illusionist. Yeah, you can see the confusion. Although technically, the animated film is called L'Illusioniste because French. You know what, I'm just going to call it that from now on to avoid further confusion, and I'm sorry in advance if I butcher the pronunciation. I am just using Google Translate after all. Okay, all joking apart, L'Illusioniste is a pretty good film overall, but I honestly don't have that much to say about it. It was a really simple film with some nice animation and a lot of great ideas, but I didn't find myself connecting with it all that much. Although, I definitely still thought that this film had a lot to say about the entertainment industry, and how it can screw over some people who are perceived to be less special in their skills. The main magician guy is always being upstaged by this other band, and even when he gets a chance to shine, no one really cares about his magic act. His skills aren't netting him the profits that he needs, and so he's forced to secretly get a second job at a car wash, just like Walter White. And he's not the only entertainer who's struggling within this film, as the ventriloquist ends up homeless by the end, and the clown is depressed and suicidal, and I don't think we ever see what happens to him, which is kinda concerning. And this all culminates towards the very end of the film, where the magician tells the girl that magic is not real, showing how he really is just a dude who's struggling to make a living through party tricks. It's quite a tragic end, and I just found this film to be really compelling overall when it came to its themes. Unlike The Illusionist, where the lack of magic disappointed me, I felt that the greater focus on the personal struggles over the magic was really interesting here. There is no magic to solve all of the problems. Instead, we are left just watching people struggle to live, and that's what stuck with me about this film. In saying that though, the small magic scenes we actually did get were still really fun. So yeah, I liked a lot of the ideas for this film, but I ultimately still struggled to truly engage with it. You see, the big problem with this film is the fact that large amounts of it appear to hinge on the central dynamic between the girl and the magician. But, I'm gonna be honest, I couldn't care less about them because the characters had very little to them. The girl especially was such a blank slate to me, and I just felt like I didn't really know her. She tags along with the magician, and I don't know why. She then lives with him, and I once again don't know why. I mean, the magician is a nice enough guy, so it makes more sense than Rita staying with Chico, but I still feel like I don't really understand her as a character and her motivations, which thus makes her uninteresting to follow. However, I honestly feel like the main reason for why I felt this disconnected from these characters was because of the lack of dialogue. You see, this is one of those half-silent films, where the bulk of the runtime has no spoken dialogue, and any that you do hear isn't really that important to the narrative. It's kinda like Monsieur Hulot in a way, and yes, this is an intentional reference seeing as this film is based off a story by Monsieur Hulot actor Jacques Tati. Also, they play one of his films in the cinema. Anyway, because of the lack of dialogue within this film, the characters have to try and engage the audience entirely through visuals and body language, and usually this can work for me, but in the case of this film, it wasn't really able to engage me as much, as I ended up just finding all the characters really bland and forgettable because I couldn't really register their dynamics and their motivations and everything. And as a result of my lack of interest in the characters, I ended up finding the pacing to be a problem, as there are a lot of really slow scenes which are hard to find interesting when you don't really care about what's going on. Overall, Illusionist is a good movie with some good ideas and themes revolved around entertainment, and I know that there will be plenty of people who will get a lot out of it. However, for me, I often found myself disconnected and kinda bored, to be honest. Still, it was way better than the Ed Norton film because I can at least remember what actually happened. If this was any other year, I wouldn't have minded this film getting a nomination. However, I'm sorry, there's no way that I prefer this film to Tangled or Megamind. I would have much rather that one of them got a nomination. Actually, scratch that. Why the hell was 2010 a 3-film nomination year? 2009 had 5 noms, and every year after 2010 was also 5. So why was there only 3 here? Are you seriously trying to tell me that there weren't enough 2010 animated films to nominate? Yeah, no, that's bullshit. If this was a 5 nomination year like it should have been, then I will happily say that Illusionist deserved to be nominated. But as it stands, it does feel like some other, better films were snubbed. Such as the 2010 animated masterpiece, Alpha and Omega, baby! Oh, hell yeah! This movie deserved all the Oscars! Woo! If Alpha and Omega was eligible for this list, it would go in the top 20. The sad thing is that I don't even know whether I'm joking or not anymore. Whatever, The Illusionist was still a cool movie at the end of the day. Let's just move on before I start talking about Alpha and Omega again.